There's a tendency anymore for members of our movement on social media to compete for novel takes on a number of issues over reiterating what we already know to be true and which has been successful in the past. This is a double-edged sword. On one hand, advancing the dialectic is of utmost importance if we want to get the edge over our enemies and evade their censorship, but on the other, we risk losing our principles and abandoning tried-and-true messaging that can win over true and honest, dedicated people. It's important to reiterate that which is true, no matter how basic it might be. Our enemy is communist. They are Marxist and postmodernist radicals who have overtaken our institutions and installed themselves as global leaders. They're not liberals, per se. They are not capitalists. They're not even the bourgeoisie. They are communists. Look up cultural Marxism on YouTube and you'll find a lot of leftist content produced from 2015 to 2017 whining about the right wing exposing their culture war, its ideological lineage, and fundamental goals, which can be summarized as the total destruction of the West. They are anti-white, not racist. Israel is allowed to be racist because they're anti-white, not because the left are the real racists. They spend an inordinate amount of time attacking white people racially, while deflecting to their intellectual argumentation in order to escape the paradigm of normal criticism. For example, they are not anti-white because whites are only an ideological construct, ergo, whites do not exist in the real world. This farce is easy to see through, but it's dominant. They are Freudian sexual deviants and sexual revolutionaries whose entire political ideology is based around hatred for normalcy and order. They are postmodernists arrayed against objective truth. They deny race even when it's undeniable. They are hypocrites, seizing ethnocentrism for themselves and denying it to us. People in our movement see the matter differently, though. There's a varying degree to which this kind of thing, pointing out the obvious, is respected. There are competing milieus in the right, contingent on this very issue. One side, the populists, represented by America First and others, is decidedly anti-intellectual, advising people not to read books, to rely merely on polemics, ridicule, and common-sense messaging. Another is represented by ethno-liberals, who think hot takes and political theory are nonsense, and that we should settle for a sensible centrism, reforming the entire system rather than revolutionizing it. Yet another is mine, in which we stress the importance of revolutionary theory and vanguardism in the right. I'll begin with vanguardism because it's the closest to the issue at hand. Vanguardism carries with it the tendency to make hot takes for the simple purpose of advancing the discourse. At best, this involves the dialectic, refining it and introducing to it a new energy that allows it to stay nimble and to avoid censorship. It's the easiest way to survive online. At worst, it devolves into a form of contrarianism and narcissism, by which people compete merely to be more unique, not to be more correct. Hence, it's important for the vanguard to remember that its principles matter foremost. Vanguard revolutionaries sometimes scoff at basic bitch ideology, forgetting that at one point, they were also basic bitches. They have a tendency to forget or take for granted the practical ways our enemy succeeds and hurts our people. It's important, therefore, not to attack people reiterating basic right-wing talking points on topics such as race, cultural Marxism, postmodernism, and feminism. It's even worth keeping some centrists and reformers around because they serve as a stepping stone into the vanguard, though it's helpful to push them to become more radical. The vanguard is highly dynamic and full of energy. It's capable of most easily shaking the status quo, both inside and outside the movement. This is to its great advantage. It's also capable of carrying and preserving a dignity of its own, since it won't compromise in order to gain an advantage. The basic revolutionary/vanguard strategy in history has always been for a small milieu to hold on to unshakable principles, then wait for a moment at which the dissemination of those principles becomes possible and profitable. Populism and ethno-liberalism, on the other hand, are a form of political stasis, which we cannot afford at the moment. If it were eternally 2016 through 2018, maybe it could have some impact, but the fact of the matter is that the strategic situation is rapidly and constantly in flux. There's no longer an allied political milieu or figure to rally around. We can't really get a hold on YouTube anymore. Our messaging on Twitter is heavily retarded by the algorithm, so the anonymous meme war just doesn't really hit the same way it used to. Populists share an unlikely similarity with the vanguardists in the fact that they are also likely to give hot takes. In fact, they're even more vulnerable to the take treadmill than the vanguardists are. If the vanguardist motive behind hot takes might be to become unique, then the populist motive is to become popular. One way to become popular is to become infamous. This might explain the current trend of schizo memes and whatnot.
Look, if you have sex with a trap, you're gay. No doubt about that. And you should be ridiculed, you should be made fun of. but it's a little bit different than if you did it like 20 years ago. That's all I'm saying.
But in any case, these hot takes do nothing to help us if they're only self-motivated, designed to feed the ego. Hot takes are only productive if, and only if, they serve a critical or elucidative role. On the matter of populism, this has never been a viable strategy, but it's even less viable than in the past. Trump was a disappointment, a traitor, and a failure. All politicians, if they're allowed to run in the system at all, will be as such too, since democracies are just veiled oligarchies controlled by the post-Marxist, technocratic elite. And before you think about it, no, you won't red pill the normies, because most people hold their political point of view based on conditioning and dependency. Rarely do they have the intellectual capacity for sophisticated politics. Part of the reason why populist movements are so frequently anti-intellectual, they definitely don't have the bravery or lack of dependency to become revolutionaries. The idea that you can make one revolutionary point of view popular in the mainstream during the unbridled dominance of another is laughable. We are not capable of the same degree of propagandization and conditioning, nor should we want to be. We will always be a small minority of dedicated individuals, just like the far left. In fact, the basic structure of our milieus is the same in respect to populism. The vast majority of people don't even seem to support wokeism, and yet it continues, vanguarded by an intellectual and power elite. The unpopularity of policy does not hurt its right to continue existing and influencing society. The appeal to common sense is meaningless at best, and at worst a deliberate obfuscation. Today, it's common sense to become a cuckold, to be cringing gay, to eat hot chip and lie. Whatever is disseminated by power is common sense, because it is sense that has been made common to the masses. Expert knowledge in theory is the opposite of common sense, but it's the source of it. If we appeal to common sense, we're either engaging in a purblind appeal to an unstable and unspecified authority which is always in flux, or we're simply accepting whatever has been made common by the powers that be. That doesn't approach the degree of stability and dedication necessary for revolutionary conservatism to be possible. Centrists, despite the envy I will have of them shortly, are valuable in one way. They're usually scientists and experts, unwilling to risk their positions in academia to become political radicals. But this does mean that they can focus on data rather than political theory, and expertise becomes virtually, therefore, available to us. Their biggest revolution is to tell the truth, which we and they cannot stress enough. That aside, we had to consider the matter in terms of political strategy. Centrism is never a viable strategy for our movement, and in any wise it isn't center at all, which I'll elaborate on. First, centrism is reformism. As Kaczynski states in his manifesto, reform in history is always ephemeral. If you think you can rehabilitate liberalism, then you're suffering under the illusion that the short-term trends can last historically and are not just overridden by the general trends in the current of time. If the right wants to succeed, it needs to become a trend unto itself. The only way to guarantee that is to create a revolutionary vanguard that never compromises and which is opposed to the current system's roots, not just its current form. The fact is that liberalism cannot serve this role since it contains the very seeds of the equalitarian dissolution that we are today witnessing. In any case, liberalism is not centrism. Ethno-liberals are deliberately ignoring the revolutionary nature of the ideology they hold, which is an abnormality in comparison to the rest of human history, which ordinarily respected hierarchy and natural difference. Their insistence that they can avert the general trend of equalitarian liberal thought by introducing this or that datum of inequality is easily falsified. Julius Evola, for all of his flaws, argues this point perfectly. He notes that liberalism is essentially the revolt of the bourgeoisie, along with the masses, against the hierarchic nature of aristocracy. This revolutionary fervor, the intent to dispose a society that has a superior and regal dignity, is itself the intent to destroy hierarchical society. Communism, therefore, is inevitable after the fall of aristocracy. The idea that we can avert the death of aristocracy and hierarchy through democratic liberal principles is thus exposed to be a sham. The general trend of liberalism is the destruction of hierarchy, the establishment of human equality, whether actual or de jure, the advancement of technocratic industrialism that relegates man's role in society to that of a producer and consumer, and a philosophy that reduces man to an individual. This last point is crucial in Evola's argumentation. An individual is not a person, but a sub-person, a mere number or quantity, indistinguishable from any other individual. This reduction of man to an individual is the basis of the liberal argument for equality. If we accept individualist liberal principles, then we fundamentally accept the death of hierarchy and the dominance of equality. Trying to draw a distinction between equality of outcomes and equality of individuals is thus also impossible. One paves the way to the other by demolishing the very essence of what it is to be a person. In the traditional concept of man, A person is a product of inheritance and several other forces that comprise his nature, implicitly ranking him on a hierarchy. The basic schema is present in Plato's Republic, men of gold, silver, bronze, and so on. The traditional concept is man as quality. The liberal conception, however, views man as a quantity, irrespective of his traits. Evola goes on to deal a philosophical death blow to the liberal concept of the individual, using the principle of the identity of indiscernibles. If people are reducible to being individuals, and an individual is a quantity, then there can only be one person. This is self-evidently false, as there are many persons. Hence, the philosophical basis for the de jure form of liberal equality is contradicted. One could object that the liberals didn't actually intend to argue that people are a single quantity, but this also fails. The other basis on which the claim for liberal equality is contradicted is the self-evident basis that men are not created equal. Traditional society stratified men into a caste system for this very reason, but liberal society, jettisoning the idea of caste, opted for class instead. Class has no relationship to quality, unlike caste, but only to quantity, wealth. Individualism and class go hand in hand. The liberal bourgeois focus on wealth and class inures it to the quantitative anti-aristocratic point of view, making itself vulnerable to the Marxist argumentation and its idea of class warfare, plus its Hegelian inevitability.